Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to, or welcome back to, the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on this journey of this podcast that we designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to be the co-host of this show with industry leader Craig Brown, who is a former PLM leader from General Motors. Although he's not with us here on today's episode, it's just me and the guest. So, Craig, I'm sure you will tune in and listen. We miss you deeply when you are not here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast with us. But each week, Craig and I try to bring to this show very interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help all of the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today's episode is specifically going to be about how do you grow your career? So today, I'm really excited because we have joining us Carrie Sechel. Now, she actually works mainly with female entrepreneurs, female breadwinners, to help them have fabulous careers and do that without destroying their families. And today, we're going to talk not just to women, but also to men. But we're going to focus on that female breadwinner category as well, because I think it's really, really important that we have these conversations, especially for people who work kind of in the tech world. These are things we often don't talk about. So, Carrie Sechel, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here.
So, Carrie, I know you started off your career. I believe you were a partner at Deloitte. So why don't you give us a little bit of your background? What did you do before you were, coaching female breadwinners to be fabulous?
So my career came up through the big public accounting and consulting ranks. I started my career at Arthur Andersen, which if you've been around for a while, you know that Arthur Andersen is no longer around.
They became Accenture, right? Is that where that became?
Yeah, it's Accenture is the consulting arm. And actually the firm, Arthur Andersen, went away in the Enron scandal. So that was a very interesting first part of my career. And from there, I went to Deloitte. I was with Deloitte for 14 years, 7 of which I was a partner. And fantastic experience. Got to do all kinds of cool things. My husband, son, and I lived in India for a couple of years.
Wow.
Really, my focus was in the tax firm of Deloitte, but I got to do so many amazing things at the firm. I'm really very grateful for that. But I got to a point where I decided it was time for me to do my own thing. I really had always had this feeling that I wanted to start my own business. I wanted to do something of my own, and I wanted to do something deeply impactful. And it's not that you can't do deeply impactful work in large firms or companies, but I was at the point where it just was time to go. And so I moved on and created my own firm.
So how long ago was that? How long have you been doing this?
It's about 3.5 years ago.
So tell us a little bit about the work you do. I mean, you do coaching for individuals. What exactly do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah. So in the last 3.5 years, I've spent my time really focused on helping people who want to pivot from a job that they don't find meaningful to a job that they do find meaningful, usually in the form of their own business. And that has been amazing. It's leveraged all of my business and coaching background. But as I started to really explore the impact I believe I'm meant to make and the experience that my husband and I have had in almost 20 years of marriage, from when we were, kids in our 20s to, a really big career, a child, a move to India, a move back to the US, and some really, frankly, hard times in between. My husband and I decided that we had a greater impact to make, and we feel really thrilled to serve the female breadwinner community and their families, because my husband is an amazing supporter of me. He is an amazing dad. And I am the person who is the front forward, take charge, a leader in the family who goes out and typically is the person making the money.
So
That is a very different dynamic than we have in a lot of other relationships.
sure, although more common now than it has been in the past. I have a 22-year-old daughter, and at the time she was born, my wife's goal was to be a stay-at-home mom, and we had set up everything to go that direction. But I was in a job I didn't love, and at the same time, she got promoted while on maternity leave to the position she had wanted inside a big company for the whole like 10 years or 6 years she'd worked there, and they promoted her. So I actually quit my job and I was a stay-at-home dad for 2 years, but this was 22 years ago. So at the time I did it, people thought I was crazy. We had a stay-at-home dads organization. There were 6 of us in Austin, Texas, who belonged to it. I think that club still exists, and I think there's dozens and dozens of people who belong to it. So times have changed a little bit. So how old is your son? How long ago did you have this dynamic?
Yeah, so my son is 11. And so my husband left work about, 11, 12 years ago. And interestingly, my son, when he was 1 year old, we decided to take a position in India where we moved. And so Todd was not only a stay-at-home dad, but he was a stay-at-home dad in India.
So let's talk a little bit about this dynamic of the female breadwinner, and then we'll go to a little bit more general questions. So like I said, I think it's becoming a little bit more common, but what are some of the problems or trepidations that people face if their career is going that direction?
Yeah, and this is really critical. In the working world, particularly with really ambitious people, the stay-at-home wife model is incredibly prevalent. And so women, those of us, especially, women who are willing to take the front forward role and be the breadwinner, and not only be the breadwinner, but also have this feeling of, I want for my family to have a parent that is really integrally involved with the child's life. And that's a very interesting nuance, because it's a little bit different than dual earner families. There's a different value, and it's not that one's better or worse, but there's a different value there. And so this woman is thinking, this is great. I can have the freedom to have it all. I'm not going to feel that I'm taking my kid to daycare every day, or that I'm leaving my kid with somebody that I don't know. I'm going to be able to focus on my career that I've invested in and that I know I can do really well at, and know that my child is well cared for by my partner in life. And it seems so awesome at first. And you see this model working all over the place, because many of the men have stay-at-home wives, or their wives have jobs that are much, much less intense. The challenge is that we as women are not men, and our husbands are not women. We try to fit into a mold that's not the mold of our gender roles. And it's not that, we get into a lot, if you go out and you start Googling female breadwinner, you're going to get a lot of articles and pieces that are about society's gender expectations and society's gender roles. And yes, there are all kinds of societal expectations. I think it's incredibly difficult for the men sometimes to deal with those society expectations. But there are also innate qualities that we each have that are different. We have different hormones. We have different instincts. And when a woman places all of her female instincts 100% into financial stability for the family, there will be a lack of fulfillment that will exist. When a man is at home and he's isolated and does not have some other goal, other focus in his life, there is going to be a fulfillment gap. And, for the men in particular, they're likely not going to go join all the women's groups with the stay-at-home moms. It's not like you found a group, which is awesome, but you probably were not going to go and spend all your time.
Well, I will tell you, I wasn't necessarily even welcome. So that, it was an interesting dynamic. And again, this was 22 years ago. I did it for 2 years. And the interesting dynamic was a lot of people were really judgy. I hope that society is less judgy of people taking alternative paths to all types of things today. But people were very judgy about it. Now, everybody had an opinion and everybody felt like they had to share it. So one of the things I did is I started a side business. I was a wedding photographer at one point in my life. So I started photographing weddings because those were on Saturdays. So we were able to adjust the schedule. And that sort of filled the gap, I think, for me, is I had this successful little side venture going on that every Saturday I went out and photographed a wedding.
Yeah, and that is so important. My husband actually started doing some photography, not wedding photography, but landscape photography, and did that a bit. That was a great help to him to really have another focus. But I will tell you, over the years of my constant career achievement, time away from home, the what I call the lie of the virtual world, which is the lie is that virtually you can be a parent just like virtually you're a leader for your team, it's a lie. It doesn't work the same way. My family got to a point where we were all consumed with guilt, shame, and resentment for all kinds of different reasons. We were operating like a machine. We were operating with just parts of us that were operating, and none of us felt like full people, including our son, Daniel. Because when parents feel guilt, shame, resentment, the kids, they start to feel that too. We got to a point where we realized that we had to do family a different way.
So what are some tips then for people who might be finding themselves in some sort of a situation like this? What sort of tips do you have to be able to balance it? Or as you say, sort of in your tagline, have a fabulous career without destroying the family?
Well, number one, you've got to get completely and totally clear on your priorities. Totally clear. And being honest with yourself and saying, I'm not going to try to fit into a mold of somebody else's family. And looking at somebody else's family and saying, that's what my family is supposed to be. It's you and your partner who are on a journey together in your life together. And collectively looking at your priorities, communication and commitment. You know, that's one thing that my husband and I always talk about is we never stopped communicating. Even though we were in a really tough spot, we were not happy. We were not operating functionally. We had a lot of emotions we had to work through. My husband had an alcohol habit that he had developed over years of just really being bored and not knowing where to take himself, really losing himself. We kept communicating and we stayed committed. And there are going to be times when you're dealing with a situation with your partner where you have to work through some pretty tough conversations.
So I actually think that this is relevant for people no matter what. I mean, even if if they don't have kids and it's a dual income, or if they do have kids. I mean, I think a lot of what you're talking about isn't just for the female breadwinner. This is for everybody who has a job. And even if it's just a significant other or an entire family, all of these things really matter. So what can people do, not just female breadwinners, but what can people do who are out there earning bread and have a career? What can they do to ensure that they have this fabulous career and this fabulous life?
Yeah, so it's really, like I said, the first step is getting clear on your priorities. And with your partner, what are your family priorities? And again, like I said before, and this is, as you said, critical for everybody. It's not what everybody on your street's priority is, or everybody in your community, or everybody in your church or temple, or wherever you worship, if you do, or everybody who you work with. It is what your priorities are. There are things that might not matter to you at all that matter to everybody else. And you need to let those go, because the reality is we only have so much time. Look, I totally get being an achievement junkie. It is in my blood. I have to pull myself out of work sometimes because I get so consumed. Building that career, if you are an achiever and you are looking at what you can do to get ahead, my guess is that you're going to figure that out because it's something that's measurable. Achievement is something that you can see incrementally move very quickly over time. It's more difficult to measure the other priorities in your life. And so it's pulling yourself out, making really clear about your career priorities, and only investing time in what's going to move those career priorities forward, and pulling yourself out and actively and intentionally investing, and I'm saying investing intentionally here, your time in what your highest priorities are at home. I'm going to give you a totally relatable example of what I mean here. So my family and I, it's Christmas here in the United States. Even if it's July when you're listening to this, it's still totally relevant. You're going to get this. But the day after Thanksgiving, we decided to adopt a kitten. And this kitten is quite a little rascal and very lovable, but is consumed a lot of our time. We didn't get as many Christmas decorations up as we normally would have. And there are no ornaments on the tree.
Well, because you have a kitten, there's no ornaments.
Yes.
Kittens
for
and
multiple reasons.
Kittens and small children mean no ornaments on tree.
Yeah. And so my son a couple of days ago said, Mom, it just doesn't really feel like Christmas. And that just threw me right into that like reaction mode of being a mom and looking and saying, my house doesn't look as nice as it should. My kid doesn't think it seems like Christmas. This is going to be awful. I have to fix this problem immediately. And I'm sure that many of the listeners here are problem solvers. So you're like, you see problem, you attack it. Like, I am going to fix this. We are going to get those ornaments up, lickety split. We're going to make sure the cat doesn't get on them. And this is going to seem like Christmas, darn it. But I stopped myself. And I was like, okay, I only have so much time. There's a lot of work that has to get done before year end. There's a lot of other Christmas things that have to get done. What's most important here? The most important thing is, what will make it seem most like Christmas for Todd, Daniel, and I to have memories that we remember and to feel great about the time we have together? So I said, Daniel, what would make it seem more like Christmas to you? He said, well, I really want to spend a day decorating cookies with you and Dad. I said, okay, that sounds really cool. I was like, so what do you think about the ornaments on the tree? And he's like, oh, I don't care about that. That takes a lot of time. Like, let's just leave those off. Anyways, Nelson, the cat, he'll just try to get him off the tree. So me stopping myself in my reaction mode of, I need to make it like, I need to do Christmas as awesome as I always have. And I need to make myself completely crazy. That was me reflecting what I think is expected of me as a mom, as a woman, as a parent, and expecting what I think my son wants, which wasn't what I thought he would say at all.
And I think we do that not just at home. I think we do that at work. We make up the stories in our head of what our boss expects us to do. So we end up staying until 7:30 at night doing some project that the boss doesn't care about. And therefore we didn't get ahead at all because we didn't know what the real answer was.
You're absolutely right. And that's one thing in the career. And a lesson that I learned as I was planning my exit from Deloitte. So I had a very long timeline from when I decided that there was something that I really needed to explore and do differently to when I actually left. So it was about 15 months. It took me about 15 months to get from idea of, I think it may be time, to actually saying it is time, to actually leaving for a number of different reasons. But by the time I left, I was in a place where if I really still felt that tax and accounting in a big firm was where I was meant to do my life's work, what was most meaningful and the greatest impact I could make, I could have stayed and had that great career at Deloitte and had a really solid family. Now, we were still repairing ourselves. And when I left Deloitte, I found just how much work we needed to do personally. And we spent quite a bit of time on some personal work together. But the time between I'm going to leave. And I was at that point just chronically stressed, just completely on that hamster wheel of achievement, in learning about what causes stress and learning about my own insecurities, which made me just work constantly. Pulling those back and really focusing my actions intentionally and focusing on what was absolutely most important. Delegating, learning to ask for help, learning to say no. I was able to learn that. And when I finally left Deloitte, I felt really great about that first 18 years of my career and was in a much better position to start a business, which is not easy, and to do that successfully while repairing my family and getting to the place where we are today, which is my husband and I thank each other every day for the journey we've been on, because we have such a strong and deep and connected relationship. It's really joy every day, which is pretty awesome.
So if people are struggling with keeping the balance, I guess so personally, I don't know that you're ever in balance, but we use that term, I don't know that balance is a real thing, but we use that term and it's an understood term. If people are struggling with that balance between work and home, you talked about you and your husband, you did some work. How do people prioritize making themselves and their relationship a priority when they're under all this pressure at work? I mean, sometimes people are like, I can't even deal.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that number one, the first thing that as individuals it's critical to do is to pull yourself out of just this, what I call like a hurricane. You're in the eye of a hurricane, chronically stressed, feel like you're never enough, there's never enough time, guilt, resentment, feeling like everybody in the world is asking you for more than you could possibly do. And pulling yourself out of that. You can do that with some really simple techniques. You can do that with a very simple breathing technique where you pull yourself out. You breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds, and you hold for 4 seconds. I know that sounds crazy easy, but pulling yourself out and getting yourself back in your mind and your body instead of out there in this completely reactionary mode is critical. So taking the time, which it doesn't have to be a whole lot of time, but to pull yourself out of that reactionary mode and allow yourself to have a moment to discern. And so this is one of the biggest problems, and I'm sure the people who are listening to this, who are high achievers, can relate to this. The concept of saying no is one of the most difficult, gut-wrenching things that we ever think about. Like, oh my gosh, I don't want to say no. I'm going to look bad. I'm going to look like a slacker. I'm going to look like I don't want to achieve. People are going to get mad at me. It's going to be career limiting. And so the problem is we say yes to everything that is immediately in front of us on a daily basis. And when we say yes to everything, we're saying no to a whole bunch of other things, both professionally and personally. And there are things that you should not say no to. I totally get it. But you have to pull yourself out and discern, is this really a no or a yes that makes sense? The discernment and pulling yourself out of the hurricane and calmly and rationally making decisions is the absolute first step. And, you use the word balance, and balance is used, I think, because everybody can understand it. But I want the listeners to think about this in a different way, because balance, I was like not a very coordinator or athletic kid. And I always think about balance, like the balance beam, and I would be on it and I'm like, I'm going to fall. I'm going to fall. I'm going to fall. And that's what I think balance does to us. Like this whole concept of balance is like, frankly, BS, because it gives us this feeling that we're constantly like tiptoeing through life. Like, oh my gosh, if I step off, then everything's out of balance. Constantly fall. It feels like failure all the time.
Well, one of the things that I do when I do some career coaching is I talk to people specifically about the fact that you can't be in balance, because when you're at work, you're not in balance at home. And when you're at home, you're not in balance at work. So you have to put your priorities to where you are in that moment. And so balance is an illusion. But like I said, I think societally we use it to describe being able to get it all done.
For sure.
But you're never going to be in balance.
For sure. And so I like to talk to people about harmony. And that might sound like,
Ooh, I like that term.
yeah, you think like, okay, Carrie, like this sounds really airy fairy, but like really think about this. So one of my clients was telling me about this new position that he had to go to, and every week he had to drive like an hour and a half each way. And it was kind of wearing on him, and it's like, how am I going to keep doing this? How am I going to keep doing this? And as we started to talk about it, we started to talk about like, what are like, why would you want to keep doing this? And so we realized that there was this really great gym, and he had an opportunity to work out when he was doing this hour and a half, going to this place that was an hour and a half away. And it was like, okay, I can harmonize my work and my fitness goals, even though this is an hour and a half away, and there's some things that I can do on my drive that can be really productive. So maybe I can harmonize that. Maybe I can harmonize, like one of the things that I do is, hey, you got to cook dinner. Well, I love listening to music. So I listen to music while I'm cooking dinner. It's like this harmony of bringing more parts of your life that you want together. You want to have joy, bring those pieces to the other parts of your life so they're harmonizing and building on each other.
So, Carrie, before we wrap up, we've talked a lot about sort of the life side of this equation. So I want some advice for the listeners on the career side. What should people be doing at work in order to succeed?
So I think there are two critical pieces here. Number one is to be coachable. And if you're early in your career, or if you are later in your career, even in particular, if you're later in your career, being coachable and receiving feedback is a gift. I don't care if you are an entrepreneur and you're serving individuals, or you're serving businesses, or if you're in a very large organization, or if you're in a non-for-profit, it doesn't matter. Feedback is your gift. You are not perfect. You are a person who is up and coming. And when people are actually willing to tell you what they're thinking about you, that is not exactly the most favorable thing in the world, they are giving you the gift, because then you are able to fix it. Feedback. So totally changing that gut reaction you have when you hear something that isn't perfect about yourself to, thank you, now I know and I can do something about it. So that's point number one.
And point number two?
And point number two is not worrying so much. I'll never forget when I was a senior manager at Deloitte, and I was the chief of staff to a national partner. And I was really freaked out in this role. Like, it was this huge role. She was so important. I worried constantly about whether or not I was doing a good job. And because I was spending all of my time worrying and all of my energy worrying, I really wasn't doing a great job. I was doing an okay job. I was doing an average job. And so anybody listening to this, think about this. What are you doing that is freaking you out? And a lot of your energy is focused on, am I doing well? Am I not doing well? What do they think of me? What don't they think of me? That is completely unproductive energy. It's exhausting you, and it is taking your energy away from what you know in your heart that you need to do to be successful. And I'll never forget sitting there with Dorothy, is her name, one of the most important mentors I've had. And I asked her, I said, what can I do? What can I do better? And she just looked at me and she said, Carrie, you need to quit worrying so much.
And I think that's actually great advice. I know in my own world, I've worked for myself for 11 years, and I spent a lot of it with worry stories playing in my head. What if this fails? What do I do? What happens? What happens if we lose the house? What happens if this happens? What happens if a client thinks I suck? What happens if this happens? And so I totally am sitting here nodding while you're saying that, because I've lived it. And once I stopped worrying about it, my career took off.
Absolutely. And this is going to help you in your personal life and in your professional life, because when you drop the worry and you focus on, again, the priorities and aligning your actions to the priorities and doing the hard stuff you need to do and just saying, you know what, if I fall on my face, at least I tried. You will give yourself the gift of energy. One of the things that is mind-blowing that is key for everybody to understand is that our energy, we think about our energy and we think about what we put into our bodies, how we exercise, and those are very, very important. But what is most important is to understand that our emotional well-being and our mental reeling and everything that's going on in ourselves is the source of the majority of our energy. I've heard anything from 70 to 90%, depending on what study you're reading. So if you are investing your energy in worrying, you're not investing your energy in your family. You're not investing your energy in the things that you need to do to feel good personally and to feel great about your body and to feel great about your spiritual connection. And you sure as heck aren't hitting 100% productivity at work. So freeing yourself from that, you can free yourself from that worry and just say, you know what? I want to do the best I can do. So I'm going to focus my energy on those areas.
So Carrie, thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom with everybody at the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. As we sign off, do you have any last words of advice for the listeners?
In your journey, really challenge yourself to find your authenticity. And this is both personal and professional. We have all kinds of influences piled on top of us all the time telling us who we are. And when you really allow yourself to discover who you are and you get okay with that, and you start to shape your life, your career, your goals, your personal life, your family, your marriage around who you are authentically, and you're okay with who everybody else is authentically, all that other stuff that's on your to-do list, all that other stuff that makes everything seem impossible and like there's no time, it goes away because you're who you are.
Well, I think this has been a great conversation because so often we just focus on podcasts like this about the career side. And so thank you for bringing us across the divide and touching on that personal side and bringing them both together. I think this has been a very useful conversation for the listeners. So if someone's listening and they think, I must know more about Carrie Sechel, how do they find you?
Yeah, you know what? I am super easy to find. If you go on Facebook or LinkedIn, you can find me under Carrie Sechel, Carriesechel. And if you want to email me, you're more than welcome to. I love to get your emails. And if you feel like you'd like to explore more with me, we can do that. Just email me. And I just wish you the best.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here on the show. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. Please join us each week for more thoughts, ideas, and information around the product lifecycle management careers. Hey, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools and the best career advice you're going to find. So make sure that you check out digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.